So, very good evening all of to you. Welcome to Job Grade IS. This is day third of Mains Enrichment Programme of UPSC Mains 2025. We are dealing with the GS Paper 1 History, Art and Culture. So, yesterday we discussed question about Vedic culture. Now, let me recall you certain points of answer writing, as this is the day third of Mains Enrichment Program, day third of the free workshop. Answer writing, first of all, is an art. It will not come to you overnight. You will have to practice again and again. And in this short duration of time, when you are running out of time, effectively you have 70 days for the mains examination. Structured and guided preparation is the key to success in the mains examination. Structured and guided. For that purpose, we have already launched this Mains Enrichment Program of 2025 and the Ignite Foundation batch of UPSC Civil Services 2026. Those who are preparing for 26 attempt or 27 attempt, they can enroll in our courses by downloading the Job Grade IS app. Now, what is the backbone of the answer writing? Let me ask you one thing. I have explained these topics in detail in the previous two sessions. The backbone of answer writing is the body of the answer, and what you have to play, what you have to present, and how to present a very good body and very well structured answer. Are these the sub points, or a better introduction, or precise timeline, or a conclusion that will satisfy the points that you have mentioned in the body, as you will not have any option because you need to justify the body, right? But first of all, what you need to do, you need to understand what is being asked, right? If you have understood the points that have been asked by the examiner, you will be able to fragment the question. Now, when you are able to fragment the question in 2 parts or 3 parts, automatically you will generate certain good headings as well as subheadings. And this is how by understanding certain points, by understanding the demand of the question, you will learn how to write a satisfactory answer. But there is one more point as far as mains examination is concerned. Sometimes even in history, art and culture, there are certain topics, there are certain questions in which examiner is not looking for a perfect answer. They are looking for a right attitude. They are looking for a right approach. Clear? What is important for today is there is no perfect answer. There is no perfect answer. Never try to write a perfect answer. What you need to do, what you need to focus, you need to focus upon the right approach. And what is the right approach? That I have already told you in my previous sessions. Now you are writing your content in the body, you are writing the content in the body portion, you know the points, you know the sub points, but what is further? What is further now? It is the right argument. It is the right argument supported by the valid facts. Right argument supported by the valid facts. So, what is the right approach? Right answer, sorry, right argument supported by valid facts. Supported by the valid facts. Okay. Now, what you need to do, I have told you already, in certain questions you cannot write the perfect answers. There are certain questions who are very, very straightforward. They are lollipop for you in the mains examination. Let us suppose they are asking straightforward the reasons behind the revolt of 1857. So, what you need to do, you need to know how to prioritize the topics, and rest are the facts. Rest are the facts, right? So, what my message is to you, that in easier questions, you will get penalized, but the questions which are complex in nature, examiner is, you know, he is free to reward you some marks for your right approach up to certain extent, Now it is, difficult to decode the mindset of an examiner. As far as mains examination is concerned, you can easily decode the mindset of the examiner when it comes to the preliminary test, but mains is different. And believe me, I have written multiple mains examination. There is nothing like UPSC mains examination. There is nothing like UPSC mains examination when it comes to the written tests. All kind of subjective tests that are available in our country. Why? Because it is tough to identify what is the right argument and what is the right example which will support it. And this is the essence of this examination. This is the essence of this examination. Clear? So, without wasting any time, let me discuss you the question of the day. As I promised you yesterday only, that today I will come up with a 15 marker question which has the word limit of 250 words. Now, what is the difference between a 10 marker and a 15 marker? This is not merely, the word limit and the marks assigned. In a 15 marker question, your analytical skills are being checked, not your factual skills, right? Because it is, whenever you are writing an answer which has a word limit of 250 words, you will have a lot of data in your mind. As you are preparing for the mains examination this year, you will approach a lot of books, lot of notes, which as per my perspective is strictly prohibited, because you need to learn how to stick to your resources, to the right resources. And yes, the basic difference between a 150 word limit answer and a 250 word limit answer is of your analytical approach. Your word limit is exceeding. Now your word limit has been enhanced. Now you are allowed to express yourself more. So do it sensibly. Do it more sensibly. So your chances to get penalized in a 10 marker question are lesser when you compare yourself writing a 250 word limit question, which is a 15 marker question. Both, word limits requires different mindset, but the same skill set which I have told you earlier, right? So let us discuss the question of the day. How did the colonial rule affect the tribals in India, and what was tribal response to the colonial operation? So this question is a 15 marker, and this question contains 15 marks. So let us fragment the question. How did the colonial rule affect the tribals in India, and what was the tribal response to the colonial oppression? So there are two questions. How did the British or the colonial rule affect the tribals in India? And part 2 is, what was the tribal response to the colonial oppression? So first of all, while introducing this point, you need to define colonial rule. Colonial rule. Colonial rule. First of all, whenever you are defining the colonial rule, you need to give the correct or the precise timeline. So the colonial rule was a rule which was started by the British by colonizing most of the countries in South Asia and Africa. In South Asia and Africa, and it was the dominant era of the British rule. It is known as the dominant era of the British rule, which existed from 18th century to mid of 20th century, right? And during this colonial rule, British exploited India because they couldn't become the part of India as the invaders. We have seen, for example, we have seen the Greek invasions, the Indo-Greeks, Demetrius, Menander, Kushans, Shak. They came in our country, but they adapted the cultural qualities of this landmass, which is known as India. But British came as traders. They came with a profit and loss theory, and they implemented here. So they exploited India only. Now you can justify many of the points that British gave us the RBI, British gave us the railways, British gave us, the structure of armed forces, the structure of tri-service, which they left in World War II. Now, but this fact cannot be denied that they could not become the part of this country as far as culture and society is concerned. So what you will write in introduction? The colonial era, marked by British dominance from 18th to mid 20th century, brought profound changes to the country's social, economic and political landscape. Among the most affected were India's tribal communities, whose centuries-old ways of life were significantly altered by the colonial rule. Because the question is, very much pinpointed about the tribal rule, okay? Sorry, the tribal culture. Here, the body portion starts, and your first heading is effect of colonial rule on the tribals in India. First of all, the tribal culture in India is a product of Vedic culture. Even the early Vedic culture, the early Vedic people used to live in tribes. Even before the early Vedic culture, tribes were in existence. So tribes have their different skill set, they have their different political system, they have their different system of governance, different customs, and very much important and most importantly is their tradition. Their traditions are not written, they are communicated from one generation to another generation verbally, right? So here British interfered in their system of self governance, in the system of self governance. Now British, a very strong center authority, whether it is a British Crown or the East India Company. They had a very strong system of governance, but they wanted to implement this system for their commercial gains into the tribal areas, because tribal areas were, generally the forest, generally uh, they were the dwellers of forest, and British wanted the forest resources for mining purposes, for the purpose of timber, for their enterprises. So what British did, they always downplay the importance of the governance of tribal people. They always underestimated them, because these, as per the British, these people were not educated, these people were completely inadequate, incompetent to run a proper governance system. So what British did, British colonial rule undermined the traditional system of self-governance among tribal communities, replacing them with centralized British administration, as I mentioned earlier. For example, with the advent of British administrative system, the tribal chiefs, the tribal chief who were the head of the tribes, had to pay tribute to the British. Tributes means some nazrana, and discipline the tribal groups on behalf of the British, which means we are tribal people, you are British people, now you are forcing us to dismantle our governance system. What we can do for you, we are not as much as grown like you, we are not as advanced, you are people, we will giving you some tribute, and these are our people, our tribal people, who are showing you the respect, which means discipline, Now second is cultural alienation. What I explained you in the beginning, the British came here as invaders, or you can say as traders, but they could not adapt the cultural qualities of India. On the other hand, if you talk about the medieval history and the ancient history, for example Indo-Greeks, for example Kushans, for example Shak, they adapted the Indian culture. So there was no cultural match between the tribal people and the British authority. British authority came with the mindset of profit and loss, mindset of higher gains. So what they did, they always undermined, they always tried to downplay the importance of tribal culture. They always assumed that their culture is superior to anyone as far as their colonies were concerned. There is there was a culture of Negro people in Africa, or the black people. British introduced this concept that people who were very strong build, who are black, they have very low IQ. These people are meant for slavery. But African people were the product of their geography. They had their own talents. They had their own tribes. As far as India was concerned, Indian people were the product of their geography, right? So British rule often disregarded the tribal culture, the practices, the religious belief, leading to cultural alienation and resentment among the tribal populations. Tribal people used to worship nature. Tree is the part of nature. British started cutting the trees to gain a lot of timber, and this created resentment among the tribal people. What they will do now? We will see further. They will revolt against the British. They will turn out to be a rebel. Now, British often clashed with tribals, worship of nature and sacred groves, which were integral of their way of life. Grove means a group of trees, right? Tribal people always worship nature, and this created problem for the British people, because trees were not a symbol of religion for British people. They were the commercial assets of the British. For example, suppression of tribal languages and cultures in missionary schools. Yes, British introduced a group of missionaries for the religious conversions. Many missionaries came after the victory of Battle of Buxar, after the Charter Act of 1813, and now they started converting the poor people into the Christianity for their financial gains. Tribals were one among them. Now, in missionary schools, their language and their culture got suppressed, and this was the soft power of the British. This was the soft power of the British, only because they were culturally not parallel with the tribal people. Next is social disruption. Now, tribes have their own social system. Social system means how they lived, how they collected the revenue, how they used the revenue for their living, right? Any economy, any economical system, mark my word, any economical system is responsible for the structuring of any society. Think of 30 years back in 1990, in 1995, Indian economical system was different, society was different. Now in 2025, Indian economical system on another level. Hence, society is on another level. Digital society, right? Cashless economy, cashless people. Now, here the British introduced revenue system that disrupted the traditional tribal and land tenure system, leading to conflicts over land ownership. For example, the Jamidari system. Jamidar was the owner of a bigger land mass, and he was the agent of British. Now he acted as a mediator between the British authority and the tribal peasants, and he was always pressurized by the British authority to gain a lot of tax from these tribal peasants. In return, these jamidars exploited the tribal peasants, which became the major reason of tribal resentment. Major reason of tribal resentment. Now, the Jamidari system introduced by the British in parts of India, including tribal areas, created intermediaries who exploited tribal peasants. Example is Santhal region. Santhal region at present located in Jharkhand, modern day Jharkhand, and this was known as separately Jharkhand Pargana. That time Jharkhand Pargana. So Santhal is a tribe. Santhal is a tribe who revolted in, I think, 1855 under the leadership of Siddhuji, Kanuji, Chand, and Bhairav, and with their two sisters, all of them killed in the revolt. British, brutally suppressed the revolt. We will see it further. Now, displacement and exploitation. As I told you earlier, British policies were very clear that we are here for the Indian resources, the forest resources. They exploited the forest, for their commercial purposes, for the establishment of their enterprises. Now, what about tribals? They were forced to vacate the land. They were forced to vacate the land, and in return, tribal revolted, which were suppressed by the advanced British forces, of presidencies. And we will see it further. First of all, British policies led to the forced displacement of tribal communities from their ancestral lands. Even a British official says, for sooner or later, that death will strike one day. And how can a man die better while protecting the ashes of his fathers and temple of his gods, right? But it was the only saying by the British. What British are doing here? They are snatching the land of tribals, which used to be the land of their ancestors, and this was an emotional jolt to the tribal people. Now, for example, in regions like Assam, tribal communities were often forcibly resettled and used as a labor in the tea plantations. The tea plantation in India was started by the British only for the profit purposes, right? And the tribal people were forcibly employed in the tea plants. They were forced to leave their land. They were forced to relocate near the region of Assam. Next is violent suppression. This was a very normal point. This is the reason why I have prioritized this point, in the end of this session. In nearly all instances of tribal resistance against colonial authority, British forces resorted to violent suppression. For example, these harsh measures only served to strengthen and resolve of tribal communities to resist the foreign rule. Let us suppose this point is important for the elaboration purpose. Let us suppose you are a tribal. Your ancestors lived in the same tribe, in the same land, and suddenly a foreigner came and he says, this is the land of British, and now we will do the mining activity here. Will you leave your land or will you fight for it? You will have to fight for it, irrespective of the availability of the resources and the armory. The tribal people were not fooled. They had their own resources, they had their own armory, and they were aware of the fact that their armory is nothing in front of the advanced British armory. Even after they revolted, they were suppressed brutally with violence. There are many shootouts, whether it is Santhal, whether it is Nimuchana, whether it is Bengu, whether it is Bijolia in Rajasthan. There are many instances, but they could not suppress the spirit of tribal people. They got themselves strengthened day by day and they started revolting. There were a series of revolts even before the revolt of 1857. Now, after the part 1 is over of this question, what was the question? Please don't forget it. How did the colonial rule affect the tribal in India and what was the tribal response? We have finished the answer till here. Okay. How did the colonial rule affect the tribals in India? Now, next is what was tribal response? What was tribal response? Now, these tribal people responded in two ways. Tribal response. Their response was very simple. The violent response and the non-violent response. Violent response and the non-violent response. Let us discuss the violent one first. They were the armed resistance. And the very first, one of the very first, it was not the first, the most prominent one was the Santhal revolt of 1855. Now, the Santhal revolt, the hero of the Santhal rebellion was Birsa Munda, right? Who led the Ulgugan movement. Ulgugan means the great Tamlut movement in the late 19th century. Santhal movement was led by Siddhuji and Kanuji. Santhal revolt was led by Siddhuji and Kanuji. And the Munda revolt, the Ulgugan, it was led by the heroic Birsa Munda. Now, there were notable examples of armed and tribal resistance. There were many armed rebellion against the British when it comes to the tribal people, but you don't need to mention all the revolts. Name one or two. What is armed resistance? Now, tribal in different regions launched armed uprisings against the British and their exploitative policies. The Santhal rebellion of 1855-56 and Birsa Munda Ulgugan movement in the late 19th century are notable examples of armed tribal resistance. Next is non-violent protests. Now, the most prominent one by Rani Gordinellu. Rani, this was the title to the lady Gordinellu. Gordinellu was a lady. She was a 13-year-old or 14-year-old girl uh, who was, resisting or revolting against the British during civil disobedience movement. And reason was very simple. In Nagaland, British missionaries were forcibly converting the tribal people, and this was not acceptable to Gordinellu. She resisted with her brother and she was arrested. She was arrested by British. She aligned herself with the civil disobedience movement and she was arrested. And she was released just before after the independence in 1947, and she was titled as Rani by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru in Nagaland. Now, she adopted the non-violent means of protest and civil disobedience against the colonial rule. They used their cultural symbols and practices as a means of resistance, because civil disobedience movement was a pan-India movement launched by Mahatma Gandhi in 1928, when Gandhi travelled from Sabarmati ashram to Dandi with 76 of his disciples or his followers, and he broke the salt law. And the salt is a symbol of unity in the country, because every single person in this country use salt. This was the reason why Gandhiji uh, chosen salt as a symbol uh, of unity. And this was, very fascinating to the tribal people, especially in Nagaland. They used their cultural symbols, they used uh, you know uh, their traditions to support the civil disobedience movement. They showed the faith, they shown the faith that we are the part of India, we are the part of Bharat, we are with Mahatma Gandhi. Our tribal movements are no different. There is no difference between the tribal movement and the civil disobedience movement. We are also the part of CDM, right? So this was the mindset of Rani Gordinelli. And Jhalkari Bai. Jhalkari Bai was a tribal lady and she revolted against the British in 1857. She was alike Rani Lakshmi Bai, and she was protecting Rani Lakshmi Bai in the Battle of Jhansi, but she escaped from British prison. Later on, she spent her life in the tribal movements, right? So Jhalkari Bai is a prominent figure as well as in central India, and Rani Gordinelli in Nagaland. Please never forget to mention the state or the region. Jhalkari Bai is from central India and Rani Gordinelli is from Nagaland. If you are merely writing the names of these personalities by not mentioning the region, you will be penalized in the examination. Now, next is forest movements. So many tribal communities organize forest protection movements to resist the British forest policies that threatened their access to traditional resources. What I have told you, tribal people were the dwellers of forest areas. Tribal people were the dwellers of forest areas. Now, British authority is interfering in their local laws for their commercial gains. They are cutting down the forests for the gain of timber, for the mining purposes, and they enacted Indian Forest Act of 1863, and this was completely acceptable to the tribal people. So they revolted against British to protect their forests, because forest is a symbol of nature which is worshipped by the tribal people, which is worshipped by the tribal people. There was very famous incident in Rajasthan, Jodhpur, when for timber purposes, the man of Maharaja of Jodhpur, Abhay Singh, went in the forest of Khejdi. Khejdi is a tree, and there was a lady, Amrita Devi Bishnoi. You know the importance of Bishnoi community. They were the tribal people, right? And they regard forest as their mother, and they regard the animals, especially the forest animals, the animals of the forest, as their kids. They opposed the army of Abhay Singh, Raja Abhay Singh, and they cut down with the trees while opposing the army of Jodhpur. This was the emotion of the tribal people when it comes to the forest. For instance, forest satyagraha in central provinces, this is the example. Now, the cultural revival. The tribal communities made efforts to preserve and revive their languages, culture, and traditional knowledge systems. This point, this is a nutshell. This is a nutshell, and that is the beauty of answer writing. You can make one point. You can make one point which has the collective information which you have already given in fragments in different points, right? You can collect them all and make one point. The cultural revival. At the end of the day, what tribal people are doing? They are trying to save their culture, they are trying to save their political system, they are trying to save their social system. Cultural system was very important to them. Now, tribal communities made efforts to preserve and revive their languages, cultures, and traditional knowledge systems. They recognized the importance of cultural identity in resisting colonial assimilation. What were the colonial assimilation? Colonial assimilation means their forest acts, their mining activity, their enterprises, their factories, their cantonments. Now, Bastar Revolt and Bishnoi movement, 70-30s, to preserve forests and livelihoods. I have already explained you the Vishnoi movement. Vishnoi community is a prominent community of Rajasthan. They are known, for the service of forest resources. Now, what is the difference between, the forest culture, especially when it comes to Vishnoi people, and what is the difference? The people who are serving under the forest law. Let us suppose you are an officer of Indian Forest Services. Now, it is your duty to save the forest. It is your duty to guard the forest. It is your duty to maintain the forest cover of India. But now, when it comes to the tribal people, such as Vishnoi community, it is not their duty. It is the part of their culture. Forests are the part of their life. It is their lifestyle. When it comes to lifestyle, there is no sense of duty. Duty is something else. Duty bounds you. Duty bounds you, but your lifestyle is very natural. And these people, the tribal people, were naturally connected to the forest. Naturally connected to the forest. Now, engagement with Indian nationalism. Indian nationalism, the civil disobedience movement, the engagement of Rani Gaudinellu. Again, the same point, but in a different manner. Some tribal leaders and communities engaged with the broader Indian nationalist movement, leaders like Jaspal Singh Munda and Ranima Gaudinellu. By the way, if you are live, if you are commenting on this lecture, please let me know about this Jaspal Singh Munda. Jaspal Singh Munda. Who was Jaspal Singh Munda? Who was Jaspal Singh Munda? There are certain comments. Let me see the comment. Just physics. Thank you. Sonu Kumar Yadav. Hello. Sir, आवाज नहीं जा रही. Am I audible now? Okay. So, Jaspal Singh Munda was a prominent leader who demanded Jharkhand in the early 1940s to Subhash Chandra Bose. He went to Subhash Chandra Bose and demanded a separate state of Jharkhand. He realized his dream later, after his death. The formation of Jharkhand was a product of bifurcation of Bihar. Bifurcation of Bihar. So, Jaspal Singh Munda was a prominent tribal leader of 1930s and 1940s. Anyways, and Ranima Gaudinellu advocated for tribal rights within the framework of Indian independence. All India Tribal League was founded by Jaspal Singh Munda. Jaspal Singh Munda. So now, what you will write in the conclusion? Obviously, it must satisfy the points that you have mentioned in the body. While colonial rule inflicted significant hardships of India's tribal populations, their resilience and unwavering commitment to preserving their culture, heritage and rights have paved the way for ongoing efforts to address the historical injustice and promote tribal empowerment in modern India. This is the most important point, and this, you can say, the way forward, because tribal people always, revolted against the British. British always tried to downplay their importance, but there is a long history of exploitation. There is a long history of bad blood about between the British and the tribal people. So what government of India did? They made the laws for tribal people. Even when you study in polity, the 5th schedule and the 6th schedule of the Constitution of India, it empowers the tribes that no enterprise or no company can dwell their forest for the mining purposes. You will have to take permission of the tribe. And recently, this happened in Odisha. By the way, I'm not teaching you polity because Ramendra sir will take the session of GS paper 2. You can ask about 5th schedule and 6th schedule, and there were 2 acts. There was important act, PISA Act, right? They are related to them. So now this is the conclusion, and this was the today's question. I'll come up in the next session with more PYQs. Till then, you write answers, practice hard, and for God's sake, please do not be confused among the multiple resources. Follow your standard resources and solve a lot of PYQs. Because without solving the PYQs, you cannot excel in this examination, no matter you are writing your prelims examination or the mains examination. And don't forget to subscribe our channel, the Job Grade IAS. Don't forget to install the app. If you are preparing for the batch of 2026, the attempt of 2027, you can subscribe our Ignite Foundation batch. The classes are going on. I'm taking this session of history for both prelims and mains examination. We are providing all the facilities there, whether it is answer writing or solving the objective question. Especially all these facilities are available on our app, because our app is designed in such a manner, right? All the things are not possible on YouTube. So for more information, for more guidance, you can subscribe the channel.